We got a fun one today. We got Curtis Holland joining the show, and we're going to talk optimism. Let's build the case for Wisconsin dominating Alabama at home. Let's have some fun with it. How can this season go as well as it can, and how can the Badgers hit that ceiling on today's Locked On Badgers?
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for joining us, for helping us build this incredible community of Badger fans, for making it better to be a Badger fan. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Let's just get into it, especially when we get guys like Curtis on the show, because I don't get a ton of his time, and we always appreciate the perspective. Curtis, you talked about this a little bit ago. Let's get optimistic. Let's build the best case scenario, and let's have some fun with it. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, Ryan. I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm excited. There's been so much talk of realistic expectations and, what can this team's ceiling be and all that stuff. And I just want to blow that out the window. Let's have an irrational optimism podcast and talk about why we should be 12-0 and why really this might be the best team in the history of Wisconsin football. Full disclosure, these views expressed in this podcast do not reflect myself nor Locked On Badgers' true perspective on how we think the season's going to go. But I wanted to get started with why I think, this team is going to be incredibly good this year.
Well, let's start offense. Let's pick out a few spots offensively and defensively why we're really high on it. We'll take turns on it. I want to kick it to you on the offensive side. What do we love here?
Well, the first thing you obviously got to think about when you have offense is offensive line, right? And the good thing about what we have coming back next year is we have 5 players who have seen extensive playing time and are veterans at the position coming back. We finally have a center whose true position is a center. He's not a guard who's moved over to center just to kind of, be a jack of all trades and help the team out as best he can. We have a guy who specializes in being a center, which helps us in Jake Renfro. That's going to be just in and of itself a major upgrade from last year. And then next to that, Wisconsin, we've never really hurted for offensive linemen. Obviously, last year, we saw some struggles. They were adjusting to a brand new scheme, a brand new system, spread-based play, in which their play is going to be put on blast. If they're making mistakes, it's very clearly obvious because they're not just jumbled up in a mess. But that's a year of experience that we now have that I don't think we were really expecting to have last year. And now we got a chance where we have, 6'8", 320-pound tackles that have played in this system for a year and can really benefit this offense and really drive us moving forward.
Yeah, I love the offensive line point. And I've said it, I think Nelson's going to be better this year. Renfro is the key to the whole thing. If he's there healthy the entire year, I think the value of a center isn't just in the center. It's not just in the snapping. The entire line gets better when that pivot in the middle is solid and rock solid. I think we're going to have that this year. I want to kick another one to you offensively. I think there's and I've said this, there's a very real chance Tyler Van Dyke balls out this year. He is an NFL type quarterback, and this is the type of guy who has had success in the type of offense Phil Longo wants to run.
Absolutely. And, you've had me on here. I've been the Braden Locke defender for a lot of my time. But that doesn't mean that I don't think Tyler Van Dyke can be him. In fact, if you actually look back and watch his film, he's got all the skills you need to be an elite NFL quarterback. In fact, if you put him one-on-one, and I'm going to use this name specifically because it was one of Longo's other quarterbacks, Drake May. You stack him up next to a Drake May. I would argue he's got as strong, if not stronger, of an arm, especially on a tight window pass. Now, he's not quite as mobile, but at the end of the day, being able to deliver the ball wherever it needs to be on time is a skill that very few quarterbacks possess. He's probably got the strongest arm of all quarterbacks we've had at Wisconsin since, I would say, Russell Wilson. I think when you look at what Longo's quarterbacks did under his tutelage and then what they did after he left, or maybe they went to the NFL, you could see a clear drop-off, which tells me that Longo is a net positive to the quarterback. Now, we can talk about Tanner Mordecai, what happened last year and the new things. That's a different conversation. But what I'm going to say about Tyler Van Dyke is I think his skill set fits this offense. We saw him run similar offenses at Miami, and when he did, they dominated. So I see no reason why he can't get to 30 touchdowns this season, why he can't get over 3,000 yards passing this year, especially when we extend that to the weapons we now have in the receiver room.
Mm-hmm. Who are also now here a year of experience, right? Like everything we were hyped about last year in the receiver room, those pieces are still there, plus Tretch, plus they have a year of experience. I think that room is just a year away, and then you add that into Tyler Van Dyke, who I think is going to be better on an offensive line, who I think is going to be better. there's a lot of pieces coming around this offense. Defensively, let's shift over to there. I think the biggest issue last year they've completely addressed, right? Speed and space, the ability of your linebackers to cut up angles, support the edges, get sharp running games, outside runs, quarterback mobility, yards after the catch that opposing offenses hurt us with. They've gone and I think they've completely shut that valve off for opposing offenses if this linebacker crew they brought in hits.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think adding the linebackers that we added in the offseason was key in terms of getting the types of players that Luke Fickell and Mike Tressel want on that defense. I think back when we had Jimmy Leonard, we were looking for a defense that was going to stuff the run, that was going to get to the passer, and pray to God that the quarterback only had 2-3 seconds to make a decision before he chucked it downfield, and our corners were still covering the defenders. Now we're looking for a defense that's just raw athleticism. We're trying to get the biggest, strongest, fastest, everything. The biggest, strongest, fastest corners, the biggest, strongest, fastest safeties, the biggest, strongest, fastest linebackers, the biggest, strongest, fastest D-line. Obviously, D-line, very difficult. It's a high position that every team needs. But what gives me encouragement going into the next season is that every team needs it. So that means every team wishes they had a better D-line. So we're no different than everybody else, except for maybe Iowa, who gets 2-star farm boys and turns them into monsters. But looking at the linebackers we added, the Leon Lowrys, the John Piuses, the Tackett Curtises, these are all downhill guys that can get to the ball carrier quickly. You get a guy like a Jaheim Thomas who understands the defense, who can really quarterback it back there. Combine that with a Jake Chaney, who's a grinder, who's a hard worker, who's shown dedication, a coach's kid, understands how football is played. These are things that from the middle linebacker position gives me a lot of excitement. And then you have a secondary that basically returns everybody and adds some pieces that are incredibly valuable in a DeLacy, right? So these are the kinds of things that a championship team needs. We have experience on the back end, we have experience in the middle of the defense, and then we have a D-line that, for all intents and purposes, is going to be solid. And I wanted to highlight one thing that I don't think anybody's talking enough, and that's Dylan Johnson coming in the fall. I'm going to use Keanu Benton as a comp because it's honestly the closest comp I can think of. Keanu Benton was a wrestler. He didn't even play football till he got to high school, right? But he comes in, and his freshman year, by the end of the season, he's our starting D tackle. Why? Because he was a beast. He was 6'4", 320, fast hands, fast feet. To get to the quarterback was a beast. Dylan Johnson's a little different. He's a little bit shorter, 6'2". He's 280, 295 because he's wrestling at that heavyweight class. But let me tell you something. This kid squats 730 pounds. Okay, he was 135-1 in Illinois heavyweight champion, 4-time state champion. Illinois is not a pushover wrestling state, folks. This is a good wrestling state. And he comes in, he's going to immediately impact that room. I looked down our schedule. There's not a center that we play this year that can handle a guy like that. Now, again, he's a freshman. He's going to have to adjust the speed of game, all that fun noise. But we have enough depth to get him to a point where he can play, and I think he will play this year. Down the stretch of the season.
Yeah, I love him. He's a guy that I think is going to play this year because he's going to be too good not to. And I love that you brought up Dylan, because one of the things with Dylan that people I feel like took the wrong way is he's a little older. Like Dylan's 20. Yeah, he had an extra year of high school. I'm telling you, that's a good thing. He's going to come in.
Absolutely a good thing, because now you have a guy who's physically mature enough at the same level of the rest of the college players here. And then on top of that, we get him for another 2-3 years where he's going to be 22, 23. And that alone, is going to be monumental for us. Human beings in terms of sports performance don't really reach their physical peak until typically somewhere between 23 and 27, right? It varies. Sometimes it's different, but for the most part, that tends to be the average. So we're going to get him at the beginning of the peak of his prime years. And that's going to be huge for us.
For a defensive lineman, it's 2 more years of added strength that you're going to get. And that's how BYU was always so successful, right? They had 24, 25-year-old guys because they sent their people on mission. Not people, their players were on missions, right? They would come back and they'd be a 24-year-old junior at inside linebacker that was a grown man. Like that matters.
I got a fun story about that. When I played lacrosse in college, we played BYU. They were ranked number 1. And I'd never been hit harder in my life coming across the middle. I caught a pass. Now I scored. But then the next thing I know, I was laying on the ground. My team was trying to get me off the ground because I was staring up at the sky. They had a 6'6" defensive midfielder who knocked me out. Dude must have been 30. I think he looked over and waved at his 3 kids after he did it. So, we didn't win that game, but it was definitely an experience.
Yeah, listen, that BYU model. I love that story, man. I want to finish this segment here, and then we're going to get into the schedule. We're going to take a break, get into the schedule, break down why we're going to beat all these teams. But I do think, and you and I talked about this before the show, and I've said this before, people are too hung up on last year, right? People got excited last year and they got hyped up, and now there's this general perception of like, I got burned last year, I'm not going to this year. Folks, last year has nothing to do with this year. Just because it was a bit of a letdown last year, it literally has no implication that this year won't reach a certain level in your head. Like, stop hanging on to last year and using it to frame what you expect from this season.
Yeah, and I've said this before too. I look at a lot of people, are saying, well, hey, like I was optimistic last year. We got burned. It wasn't as good of a season as we wanted. And so I'm hesitant to be optimistic this year. Hey, look, I mean, last year we didn't know what the problems were. We were just very much hype on Luke Fickell coming in and Phil Longo bringing a new system and a bunch of transfers. We got excited about that, and that's okay to get excited about. We're fans. It's fun to see new things happen and change and whatnot, especially in a program where we hadn't had a lot of change in 30 years. But this year is a different year. This year, the coaching staff knows where their problems was. If you've watched any Luke Fickell interviews in the last 6 months, he's very clear on, hey, this is where our problems were last year. This is where we missed the mark. This is where we misevaluated, and this is what we've done to address it. And then they back that up by going and doing the things that they needed to address. You could see that when he was at Cincinnati too. There's a really good YouTube video, I don't remember what it is, where he talks about how they changed their defensive philosophy over time. The first year they got there, they got shredded by Navy, so they changed their front in order to do better. And then they beat Navy, and then they got shredded by Memphis in their slow read option game. And then they changed their defense to add the overhangs. And then they beat Memphis. And then they got shredded by UCF, who spread them out sideline to sideline. And then they adjusted their defense to beat the teams that spread them out sideline to sideline. Next thing you know, they're in the college football playoff, right? Luke Fickell and Mike Tressel, they're smart coaches. They know how to make changes. They know how to adjust their defense, their teams, in order to win games and play at a high level. And Luke Fickell has been to the mountaintop. He's been a part of multiple teams at Ohio State that have won national titles. He knows what that looks like. That's invaluable to have, to be at a program like an Ohio State, to see what that looks like, to see the amount of effort they put into what it takes to be successful there, to see the type of leadership they need. These are the things that get me excited, because I know he's making the right decisions in order to move our team forward.
Nah, I'm stoked. Can football start next week? We're going to take a quick break for friends of the show. Come back. We're going to roll through the schedule and talk about why Wisconsin is going to beat some of these teams, all these teams. We're doing that next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show over at Game Time. Game Time remains your number one source for all of your ticketing needs. Whatever you need to do and wherever you need to go over to Game Time. They have the best prices, the biggest inventory, flash sales, right? So you get the best price on tickets the closer you get to the event, and you have pictures of the seats, so you know exactly what it's going to look like when you sit down with your drinks and your snacks and whatever it is, so you can have the best entertainment experience for your dollar. That's why you have to use Game Time. That's what I use to buy my tickets personally, because it's simple and it's easy, and that is basically what I need in my life. I need simple, easy, not crazy logistics. Game Time is there for me to help me get whatever tickets I need. Download the Game Time app today. Use code Locked On for $20 off. Download the app. Create an account, use code Locked On for $20 off over at Game Time. All right, let's come back with Curtis, who is on our Discord as Playmaker. Always a great follow there. Curtis, let's start rolling through the schedule. I don't know if we need to talk about the first two games too much. Western Michigan, South Dakota, we're going to beat those two teams.
Just to touch on them, I mean, this is obviously the start of our national championship run, so it is important to kind of look back at all the teams that we have. Western Michigan last year, they were 4-8, had a new coach. Their transfers is interesting. I mean, they lose 5 wide receivers, 6 guys in secondary. I mean, they're a small MAC team. The thing that I wanted to point out was they lost 41-7 to Iowa. Now, I'll let that sink in for a second, right? 41 points. Iowa scored 41 points on them. Now, granted, this was before McNamara got hurt, so we got to see a little bit more of an effective offense with McNamara there. But it was also Iowa. So if you're giving up 41 points to Iowa. What's that?
There had to be a defensive touchdown in there somewhere, right? For Iowa.
I think they might have had a return touchdown. I'm not sure. They had a number of interceptions that set them up with good field position. Let's just be honest here. It wasn't like they were going the full 100 yards each time. But if they give up 41 points to Iowa, I mean, we should be dropping at least, I don't know, maybe 80, 90, something like that. So I feel good about that game. And then South Dakota, that's a solid team. They only had 3 losses last year. They lost to Missouri in the first game of the year. They lost to North Dakota State and South Dakota State. But again, I mean, we chalk that one up as a W. There's not a lot to talk about there.
Let's get to Bama. Week 3.
Bama's exciting.
Camp Randall.
Obviously, not being a night game anymore, and don't even begin to get me started. Justin talked a lot about it yesterday, so I'm not going to go into it. But a 11 a.m. kick. All right, could be a sleepy game. Bama's got to come in. They don't like to go on the road much. They only ever play in neutral site games, or I guess UCF last year, which we all saw. They almost lost that game to UCF. That was the first away game they've had in however many years out of conference. So now they have their second one at Camp Randall, little different experience. And it's going to be an 11 a.m. game. Maybe they're not up for it. Who knows? But when you look at what Bama lost, okay, they lost something like 39 transfers. Now, they brought a lot of guys in, but here's the thing that's the kicker. The biggest weakness of this team is their secondary. Okay, they get one starter back from last year, 1.5 if you count their sort of Viper cash whatever spot guy in Devonta Smith, but their main guy coming back, Malachi Moore, he's really the only guy with experience. Otherwise, they bring in Damani Jackson from USC, who was a 5-star, but he played at USC, and we all saw how that defense worked out. And then you bring in a freshman who's going to be starting opposite him, right? And then you got a transfer from Michigan who plays safety, who he didn't start last year. He played, but he didn't really start. So you have a lot of new guys, and then behind that, it's all freshmen. They have no one else that's experienced back there, and so that whole secondary is overhauled. Now come in here, we're playing at home. Luke Fickell, you got the fire, you got the energy, you got Phil Longo in his bag dialing up plays. This game is going to look exactly like the LSU bowl game last year. That's how I see this going. I think it's going to be a back and forth game. I think looking at their receivers. Also, they have a bunch of new starting receivers, so it's not like they're proven. Their running backs, none of them have started. They're not proven. Their line and Jalen Milroe are the strength of that team. And so I think this game is going to be another shootout in which I think if, being at home with a more experienced roster, I think that leans in our favor.
I love it. And not to mention, like Saban's specialty is defensive back, secondary, coaching that back seven. He had a complex scheme, and he's gone as well, obviously. So adding even more
down to Ohio State, and we don't play them.
That's the biggest loss of it's maybe the biggest non-quarterback portal move of the entire offseason. That's one of the best defenses in the country. All right, so yeah, I'm with you. Let's beat Bama. And I do think it's an interesting spot with a brand new coaching staff of Alabama. Week 3, we saw last year. It takes a while for things to gel. Now you have a brand new staff of 40-ish new players with the portal and the recruits coming in.
Not to mention the only player that's probably been north of Mason-Dixon line on that team is Caden Proctor, and then their coach. So, it's a brand new environment for them.
I do wish it was a night game, man. But then we get to bye. Go to USC. Now, I think it's interesting with USC. I was looking at this the other day where obviously it's a road trip for Wisconsin, but the week before USC has to go to Michigan. So they're playing Michigan, Wisconsin back-to-back. That is a tough stretch. Thoughts on our game out in USC?
So USC. Who's been USC's bugaboo for the last 3 seasons in the Pac-12?
Utah.
Utah is the only team in the Pac-12 that runs itself like it's a Big Ten team. They get 3-star guys, hard-nosed guys. They train them up. They coach them up. They get them disciplined. They play defense. They play solid fundamental defense. And guess what happens? Every time USC played a team like that, they lost. Last year they had Caleb Williams. What did they do with Caleb Williams? They went 7-5.
7 wins.
7 wins. They beat Colorado by 7 points. Okay? This is not an elite team. Now they could be. They have elite athletes on that team, but it's not an elite team yet. You look at what they're doing. They're getting a new defensive coach, okay? The funny thing about me is they're adding this coach. Oh, he was elite at USC. Well, if you look at USC's roster last year, 9 of their 11 starters were seniors. And then half of their backups were juniors or seniors. So this was
UCLA, right? You said USC.
And I know the new defensive coordinator who came from UCLA. His defense that was elite last year. And it was a good defensive unit. Don't get it twisted. But it was all seniors. And now he's coming in after having 1 year of great defensive, coordinator play, and he's supposed to turn Lincoln Riley's defense, who's never had a good defense in his entire coaching career, around in 1 season with all new transfers. Especially when last year we hear talk that Tackett Curtis, who's now on our team, was the strongest player on the defensive side of the ball last year as a freshman. I'm not buying anything they're selling on the defensive side. I'm going to have to see that first. I think they made the right moves. I think Lincoln Riley realizes that if he's going to compete in the Big Ten, he's got to change his program up and put more emphasis on defense. But that's not a 1-year culture fix. I mean, we see it all the time. We saw it with Dabo Swinney last year at Clemson. He hired Garrett Riley, but then he told Garrett Riley he was going to run his offense, and you saw what happened. We saw it with Paul Chryst. We hired a new offensive coordinator, thought we were going to change it up, but we didn't. We ran the same offense, and we saw how that turned out. I don't think this is going to be a 1-year fix for USC, and I think we're going to be able to shred that defense. And then on the flip side, Miller Moss, he had 1 good game against who? He had it against Louisville last year. That team was coached by Jeff Brom. I'm going to ask you something. What were the Badger stats against quarterback stats against Jeff Brom-led Purdue teams over the last 5 years? They were very good. They were above average for Badger quarterback play. So I'm just telling you right now, we have an experienced secondary. Their wide receiver room, similar to ours, got a lot of athletic potential, not a lot of proven guys. So it's again their fourth game. It's going to take them some time to get it figured out. Their program's going through what I call a mini rebuild right now. I'm finding it really difficult for me to look at that game and say I think we win that game. I don't, especially after getting beat up by Michigan.
Yeah, I love what you're selling here with USC, because I've said the same thing, that people are terrified of USC for some reason coming into the Big Ten. They're not ready for this. They're going to get beaten up in the trenches. And I know for a fact, well, I shouldn't say for a fact, I know from people who have told me and who know for a fact, Lincoln Riley doesn't want to hit in practice. There's a reason his defenses are always bad. And unless he fundamentally changes, it doesn't matter who the DC is. They're still going to be soft with a capital.
And the funny thing is, I swear we probably hit more over spring ball this year than USC is probably hit in practice for the last, I don't know, since Lincoln Riley's been coach.
Yeah. Now, the only thing I will say is Lincoln Riley will have, no matter who's the quarterback, I have faith he's going to have a good quarterback. Whether it's Moss with just one game last year, because there's a track record there. So the secondary better be ready. But I'm with you. I'm not terrified of USC whatsoever. All right. So we are 5-0. Let's head to Purdue, home game, following up USC.
Purdue, come on, Ryan. We haven't lost them in 20 years. I mean, unless you're going to tell me they're going to have a couple Heismans pop out of nowhere and rechange the game. They got another Rondale Moore back there somewhere, but that's a W for us. I mean,
yeah, I think we beat them up, actually. I think if this start goes the way we're playing it out and we've beaten Bama and we went on the road to USC, I think there's a ton of momentum, and I think we avalanche Purdue.
Oh, for sure.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we're going to finish up with the schedule. We are marching towards the national championship on this show, and I friggin' love it. Today's episode is also brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel remains the number one source for all your sports betting needs. Whatever you need, futures, parlay spreads, teasers, maybe a future on the Badgers winning the Big Ten after listening to this show and getting a little fired up about it. You can probably find that over at FanDuel when they release those. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on whatever you want on FanDuel. Parlay spreads, teasers, baseball's in full motion, obviously NBA playoffs. Win some bucks and get some Badger gear. Spice up the man cave. That's a great way to do it if you want to. Over at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. The ultimate place for sports betting, sports books. Please do it responsibly, but it's what I use. It's what Locked On uses. So you're not going to go wrong by going over there. Let's get let's get Curtis back on and continue talking about this. All right, so we are undefeated, marching through, pumped Purdue. Now we got to go on this little mini road trip. We got going to Rutgers first. Greg Schiano.
Yeah, so I'll be honest. Rutgers, I think, is a team that's going to surprise people this year. They return almost everybody except for their quarterback, but they bring in Nathan Kaliakmanis, who, honestly, I think in the right circumstances could be a decent quarterback. I think, having to play under PJ Fleck is always just, a hamper on anybody's existence. So, him, playing for PJ probably hurt him in the long run. But now he's out of that system, so I think there's some upside to him. I think he's going to be a competent quarterback for him. The main thing for me is they return almost all their defense, and the D tackle they lose, they get a transfer from Florida State. So they're going to be solid on the backside of the ball. But this is a game where, I'm going to say it like this. This is a game where on paper we should win this game because we have a better team. And I think one of the differences of this year versus the last 2-3 years is that on paper, 2021, we probably should have been 10-2, 11-1. In 2022, we probably should have been 9-3. And in 2023, we should have been 11-1 on paper. But our team wasn't in the mindset where they could do that yet. I think this year Fickell's got him right. I think we're in the team that's got the mindset that when we see a team on paper that we should beat, we beat that team. And that's how I feel about Rutgers. I think they're going to give us a game for sure. Because I think, like I said, they're a team that I would look at the over on and seriously consider. But I think it's just they're just not at the athletic caliber that our team is at.
Yeah, Kaliakmanis feels like a quarterback Schiano can have some success with for sure, and he always finds defensive secondary talent. Like they put guys in the NFL pretty frequently. He's a good coach, but I agree with you.
Keep in mind that offensive coordinator at Rutgers is the same one that was at Minnesota when they recruited Kaliakmanis in the first place. Yeah. So, again, like that's going to be a solid team, but that's a team we should beat, and I do feel comfortable in saying we'll beat that team.
Well, there's something to momentum as well. Like if you start rolling these wins, like. There are years where we've lost to Northwestern or Rutgers type teams because you could almost feel like that loss was coming because the team was dragging through parts. Like it wasn't clean. If you get disappointed and you're playing clean football, Wisconsin is a better team than Rutgers, which brings us into Northwestern. Following up the Rutgers game, we head to Northwestern in their quasi-temporary stadium. Obviously, their facilities are being rebuilt there. Always a place Wisconsin's with.
I was making a joke. I'm going to bring my pop-up chair and a cooler with some juice boxes, so the players want some juice boxes at the end of the game. We can give them some juice boxes, maybe some pizza rolls. Yeah, I think that's a W too. I think last year's game against them was an absolute fluke. I don't think that was representative at all what our team was last year. I don't think it was representative of what their team was last year. I think that was the game where the culture sort of shifted in the locker room. And you saw it at the end of the game. The players were pissed. They knew what it was. Luke Fickell knew what it was. He's never going to call out the team, but the players definitely did, and they were not happy about it. And I know that I think that's going to be a game where we're looking for revenge. And it's funny when you watch us when we lose Northwestern, the next year we come back and we crush them. It's like how dare you beat us when we know
Right.
we're better than you and we play like crap when we play you, but then the next year it's like it's revenge time. That's kind of what this one looks like to me. This is going to be one of those Northwestern beatdowns where we beat them to get revenge, and then don't ask me about 2025 because I don't want to answer what I think will happen in that game.
Right. It'll flip. The cycle continues, the cycle of violence. All right. So then we get Penn State at home. This is a big one.
So Penn State is a team I'm not high on. I know everybody's high on Penn State. They have a lot of athletes. They've recruited as good, if not better, than Michigan over the last, five or so years. But here's the thing: I know spring games are not conclusive as to what your team is going to look like in the fall, but they're definitely indicative. I mean, Drew Willard, go watch that game. I encourage you to go watch the Penn State spring game and tell me if you're afraid of that team after watching that game. I mean, it wasn't that he was throwing interceptions; he wasn't even within 5 yards of a receiver. It was wild. The receiving core is nothing that's scary. They lost their top two receivers to the portal. They bring in Julian Fleming, who was buried at Ohio State. They don't really have a deep threat that's that concerning. Our secondary is going to play well against them. My main concern with them is stopping the run. And this is where we're really going to see how good our system is with our linebackers, because they have some dudes at running back. That is very much true. And that offensive coordinator they brought in from Kansas, they can run the ball. Now, my question is their offensive coordinator a product of coaching under Leipold? Because Leipold had won everywhere he's been. So is that the case? Or is he really a guy who's an offensive guy? And if he's an offensive guy, they'll give us a game. But if he's not, Penn State, I don't think they develop their players at the caliber that some other programs do. Their defense is going to be good, but again, I don't think their offense, they're like the slightly better Iowa. I think we got a really good shot, if not outright, just beating that team. I just look at them. I just don't really see, outside of maybe if they get some good run games, how they really beat us. But again, Drew Willard, man, I'm telling you, go watch that spring game. You'll see what I'm saying when I say that.
A couple thoughts on this. You mentioned it, spring games aren't always indicative of what happens in the season, but go back and look at Wisconsin's spring game last year.
Absolutely.
There were some struggles we saw there that really kind of portend into the regular season. So it's not nothing is what I would say. It's a point of evidence that you need to take into your consideration. I echo your concern on the run game. Penn State led the Big Ten in rushing last year. They got some horses at running back. That's a challenge. But, yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm not overly afraid of Drew Eller.
I believe they play either Ohio State or Oregon the week before us.
I think they have a bye, actually.
Oh, maybe they have – okay, well.
Yeah, I do think that – I looked at that. I think they're coming off a bye, which – listen, buys can be dual-edged swords. I'm not saying it doesn't help you, but at times it hurts you if you're in the middle of building something to take a step back too. All right, then tricky one here, come off Penn State. Let's say we beat them. We're rolling along. We got to go to Kinnick.
Oh, that's gonna be a 50-50 game no matter how you slice it. I will never ever say in my life, how good we are, how bad Iowa is, that's a game you can overlook. That they're gonna come out, they're gonna be trying to swing in. I'll be at that game, representing. But that's gonna be a tough one for us. But here's the thing: this is what I think about Iowa. If you look at Iowa over the last 4 years, they've been pretty successful. But the reality is, they've been the exact same team the last 4 years. There really has. It's like, are you going to tell me that a team that had Nate Stanley, Amir Smith-Marset, Desmond King or Desmond Jackson, whoever that corner they had that was an All-American, like, are you going to tell me those teams weren't as good as the team we saw last year of Iowa that was 10-2? No, it's the same team that they've had for the last 4 years. The difference is the rest of the conference on the West has just been bad. Wisconsin hasn't held up there under the bargain over the last 4 years, and so it's made Iowa artificially look better than they are. We watched what happened to Iowa when they played good teams. They got smoked by Ohio State. They got crushed by Penn State. They got smoked by Tennessee. They're not that great of a team. They're just good enough to beat the teams they're supposed to beat. And if you're not playing your game, they can get you too. But honestly, I think we beat that team. I think that they're the exact same team they were last year and the year before that and the year before that. But I think we're a better team than them. I think we beat them next year.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's a little bit of former Wisconsin and Iowa, where we were also artificially inflated at points, and we'd go and you'd play in Ohio State and you wouldn't beat them for 8 straight years. All right, so we beat Iowa. Then we have a bye. I think this is a great spot for a bye, right? You're coming off the Penn State, Iowa. Yeah, it's a great spot for a bye. This one gets super tricky to me. Then you have Oregon at home. Oregon's coming off playing Maryland, so they're not coming off of a super physical game. Oregon at home, we're rolling along, no losses on the schedule. I think Oregon's too deep. This is the one I look at on the schedule and I just say their defensive line is 8 deep. They have 2 quarterbacks. I don't know, man. I don't know how we beat Oregon, to be perfectly honest.
This is how you know I'm going national with this podcast. I think we beat them, and the reason why I think we beat them is because it's late in the year. This is the first year they're in the Big Ten. They have a difficult schedule. They got to play Ohio State. I believe they play Michigan too, if I'm not mistaken. You said they play. Do they play at Maryland or Maryland at home the week?
Maryland goes to Eugene,
Okay.
so they get Maryland.
So that would be something if they had to travel across the country, come back, and then travel again, right?
Yeah.
But even then, they'll have traveled to a bunch of games nowhere near Eugene, right? They're going to be physically beaten up over the course of the year. Now, they have a lot of depth, but guess what? Depth doesn't mean anything if they haven't played, right? So the guys behind them are going to get baptized into the Big Ten by fire if they start to lose guys on that stretch. And I think they will. I think they're going to be in for a rude awakening. Now, I will caveat this by saying I think Oregon is going to be the best team we played this year. I think that it goes Oregon, then Bama, and then Penn State, USC. But I think that Oregon is by far the best team we played this year. To your point, they got a lot of depth. I think the way we beat them is that it's at home. I'm hoping it's a night game. I'm hoping Fox decides that they want to watch someone else play that week, and we get the nightcap with NBC. And then I think that over the course of a Big Ten season, it's a lot of hitting, a lot that they're not used to. They've struggled with Utah the same way USC has in the last 3-4 years, right? We're going to see what Oregon's made of when they come up here late in the year. And we're going to see if they're really a national title team or if they just have a lot of flashy name next to a Dan Lanning who, while everybody's saying he's a really good coach, he does a lot of good things, outside of being DC on Georgia, he hasn't done a lot. So we'll see what they really are. I mean, Mark Helfrich went to a national title with Scott, with what's his face? Scott, the guy that was the Nebraska coach as his OC. We saw how that ended up. So we'll see. We'll see if they are who they say they are. I do think they're the best team we play, though, and I do think that's going to be a game where we have our hands full.
The one point you're hitting on that I think is really good is the Big Ten there's a lot of body blows in the Big Ten. It's like a boxing match, and you just keep getting hit and hit and hit and hit, and it's hard to play Iowa. It's hard to play Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio State. Those teams hit at a level other conferences I don't think consistently hit at. So it will be a test.
I used to know players who would talk about the bowl games all the time. They'd say the bowl games were the easiest game of the season because they'd usually play like an SEC or an ACC team, and those players they never wanted to hit you. They would just like run away from you. They'd be like, "Oh, why are you trying to hit me?" It's like it's because it's football. It's a different mindset, and I think that it's going to take the Pac-12 guys to come in a couple of years to get that right. I mean, Nebraska still hasn't all the way figured it out, and I know we're going to talk about them next. So
yeah, let's go there. Speaking of Nebraska, so we come off Oregon, go to Nebraska. Matt Rule, Dylan Raiola. Sorry. Thoughts on going to Nebraska here at the second to last game of this season?
Yeah, and I'll be honest. To me, this is actually the scariest game on our whole schedule because I hate its spot. It's right after Oregon. It's close to the end of the year. And I think that Matt Rule's a really good coach. I think he's going to have that team humming. You're going to have a disciplined, at minimum, a disciplined team. Something you didn't see in Scott Frost years. Like you're going to see a team that knows his assignments, that plays it well. Their defense is going to be solid. They're going to have a solid defensive unit. The thing that helps us is, again, their offensive line has no depth, right? So as soon as their offensive line, one of them goes down, it's worse than ours. Like they're going to be in trouble. And Dylan Raiola, he's still a freshman. So going back to the spring game thing, if you watch their spring game, you'll see Dylan Raiola really looked the best out of all the quarterbacks. Not named Tyler Van Dyke. Too bad we couldn't actually see how he looked. But but Dylan Raiola really balled out in their spring game. But they only played against the freshman second team. So really, is he really as good as that spring game tells? We'll have to see. I have some conspiracy theories on that. But I think that Dylan Raiola, again, he's going to be good for him. I don't know if it's going to be his year this year just because he's a freshman. But this is a game that scares me a lot. I do think we win because, again, it's Nebraska. They haven't beaten us in 10 years. It's a mental thing for them at this point. I got to see it to believe it. So, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that game.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I have to see them beat us. But I do. This is also similar to the argument that you can't put too much stock in last year in predicting this year. For the Nebraska thing, I can't put too much stock in the last decade, considering Matt Rule's only been there for a couple of years, right?
It's a different program than it was under the last two coaches they had there for sure.
Yeah, he shifted the culture. And then we finished up with Minnesota, and I honestly think we boat race Minnesota, and I purposely use that word, but I think we boat race Minnesota this year.
Fired. We're getting PJ Fleck fired. I made a comment several years back that Wisconsin has a habit of getting coaches fired. We got Bo Pelini fired from Nebraska. We got Les Miles fired from LSU. We got who was the other coach I'm trying to think of? Mark Ripp from Miami. We got him
Indiana
fired.
coach after we hung 80.
From where?
Remember Indiana? I forget the guy's name, but the year we hung 83 on him, he got fired at the end of
Oh
that
yeah,
year.
that was throwing me back. That was my freshman year. I remember telling my roommate, he was like, "You want to go to that game?" And it was cold and rainy. I said, "No, I'm gonna sit in my dorm and eat pizza." That was a great experience. I had the best time. They got cold and wet, but they watched 83 points get scored. Yeah, we got him fired too. So we're in the habit of ending coaches' careers. And wouldn't it just be the most poetic thing in the world to absolutely obliterate this Minnesota team who they're trying. I think we could get a rat beef going with the Locked On Gophers, podcast coach. He's
Oh
really
yeah,
high on their team, but I don't mind getting a rat beef Drake Kendrick thing going on with them. I think that this team that they just don't have anything really to offer. They got a bunch of 3-star unproven guys who haven't really done anything. They got a quarterback who came from FCS. We saw what happened. We only brought a quarterback from a Group of 5 team. We saw how that turned out for us last year. They're expecting that kind of guy to play when they have no receivers and a running back who's solid, but we've seen better running backs even from that program. And then I just they lose their defensive coordinator. PJ Fleck is PJ Flecking around doing whatever he does. I just don't really see them moving forward with him after this year. The Big Ten is too much money. There's too much success here. They're trending in the wrong direction. No one likes PJ Fleck outside of Minnesota fans. So I just see us ending a career and just capping off a perfect 12-0 season with a firing of PJ Fleck. Wouldn't that be
absolutely
poetic?
love it, dude. That would be the greatest season ever. Go 12-0 and then beat PJ Fleck and get him fired. He is Curtis Holland. This has been the Optimistic Show, and honestly, it's been a great show. Curtis did a ton of work on the different programs on the schedule. What is if I could ask you, obviously this is the perfect season. What do you think happens? Give me a quick record prediction.
Yeah. So going back to actually my real thoughts here. I'm somewhere between 8-4 and 9-3, and I think that the games that we lose are not necessarily the ones that everybody's highlighting in terms of the Penn State, Alabama, USC, Oregon. I think we lose to Oregon. I think that's the best team on our schedule. I mean, they've got a ton of depth. My only hope is that they have a whole Big Ten season ahead of them, and something happens to them, and they maybe aren't as deep as we think they are. That's really my hope with them, or maybe they're not as good, and everybody's hyping them up. Who knows? But I think that's the best team on our schedule. Alabama, I mean, they still, even though a lot of their players are freshmen, sophomore, it's still like 4 5-star guys. The transfers they brought in, they do a good job of patching holes. I don't think they're as elite athletes as the guys they lost, but they patch the holes. Like, for example, they brought in the center from Washington. That's a great spot for them. Things like that. So that's going to be a solid game. USC, I'm concerned with a couple of the receivers. There's a couple guys I don't know how we cover, but overall, what I said about USC, I genuinely believe. I don't think they're going to be a good team next year. I don't think they're going to be a good team the following year. I think it's going to take them 2 or 3 years to really get that program to a level that can compete consistently at the Big Ten. I can't wait to see the look on the USC fans' faces when they go into Ann Arbor and get absolutely bulldozed into the dirt. That's going to be hilarious to me.
It's gonna be great.
And then Penn State. I don't really think Penn State just doesn't develop. I mean, the guys come in there, they play at the same level they do when they leave. It's like they just don't develop. They get marginally better by growing older over 3 years. And I think that we haven't beaten Penn State, but every time we haven't beaten Penn State in the last 10 years, it's because we beat ourselves in some stupid way, like by throwing 4 turnovers on the goal line, or throwing an interception at the end of the game, or just stupid things, like giving up a 15-point lead by just not covering deep receivers, like stupid stuff that we should not lose a game, but we lose the game for. The game that does scare me, like I said, is Nebraska. That's a tough spot. They're a good team. They're going to play hard. They've got pride now. At least it feels like they got pride now. Iowa's in a tough spot, but I think that my assessment with Iowa stays the same. I think that they're the same team they've been for the last 4 years. So, like I said, I'm somewhere between 8-4, 9-3, just because I think the length of a season, we're going to drop something here or there, and we're probably going to lose to some of those really good teams. So we'll see. But I am optimistic. I think I'm more optimistic than most on this year. We'll see how it all turns out.
Yeah, I love it, man. It's always great when we get Curtis on the show. Appreciate everybody tuning in as always. Thank you so much, and we'll talk later.